to have our guest with us today, Dr. Eugenia Weiss, who is joining us for International Women's Month. We celebrated International Women's Day on March 8th, and we're just going to keep it going for the whole month. So I'm just going to kind of jump into it. My name is Annalisa, and I am coming at you from LA. And if my colleagues want to introduce themselves.
Greetings, everyone. This is Renee, and I'm coming from LA as well. I'm real excited for today's conversation. And, I just have to say, when we come to these months, I have my own views of, it's not a month. Women's work is always being done every moment of the day. And my last point, none of us will be here if it wasn't for women. So I'm done.
You're just starting. All right. Gabby.
Wow, Renee, I love that. Yeah, so hello everyone, I'm Gabby coming at you from Houston, Texas. And I'm so thankful that we have this space to celebrate women. And like what Renee said, it's not just today, but all day, every day. So thank you all for joining us.
Great. And we want to give a shout out to our colleague, Melissa, who isn't here. We're thinking of you today, sister, as you take care of your family. And our thoughts are with you. So today we have Dr. Weiss with us. She just celebrated passing her dissertation. Two doctorates she has. And I'm so excited because about 2 years ago, Eugenia and I started this project as two editors out of four for a book that's called Women's Journey to Empowerment in the 21st Century. And it's a transnational feminist analysis of women's lives in modern times. That's a mouthful. But Eugenia was part of the team of women that put it together. And how we really kind of started this book was that we were sitting around a literal table, and saying, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we were able to tell the stories of women? And 23 chapters later, we were able to produce this book, not just the two of us, but also with our colleague, Dr. Kristen Zlesky, and also with colleagues all the way across the Pacific in China. So it was a really interesting and creative process. And I just kind of want to welcome you, Eugenia. I know that introduction didn't do you full justice. So maybe you could also tell us, where you're coming from, and tell us a little bit about yourself before we start.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm calling from Henderson, Nevada, and just excited to be here. Annalisa and I went on this venture with the book, but we've had other adventures in terms of women's empowerment and girls as well, both here in the United States and abroad. I'm originally from Santiago, Chile. So I'm also bringing the sort of Latin American flavor and perspective. So you can call me Doctora if you like. And also colleagues with Dr. Renee Smith-Maddox, and also working with Gabby, soon to be doctor. So, and her soon to be child, which could be daughter, we don't know yet, but we're very excited for her. And sorry if I spilled the beans, Gabby. Let the cat out of the bag. I'm just very excited for you. So I'm a clinical professor at the University of Southern California. And what can I say? I think, education is worthy, and it's a lifelong process. And no matter how many degrees, you're still learning, and it's lifelong. So of course, we always encourage our girls and women to pursue education and leadership, because it does lead you somewhere. It gets you often a seat at the table just by having that credential. But certainly it doesn't stop at the bachelor's, master's, doctoral level. It's always about learning and contributing and helping those that don't have the same privilege and opportunity towards education. So Yeah, that's my little spiel about that.
So
You know-
Eugenia, go ahead, Anna.
Yes.
Go ahead, Renee.
I'm listening to you because we always hear the metaphor of table. But what does it mean for women to be at the table?
Well, yeah, I'm going to steal somebody's idea, but and I don't remember who said it, but I just thought it was so brilliant. If you're not invited to the table, just bring your own chair. Bring your own folding chair. Sometimes we have to be assertive. Sometimes maybe even a little bit aggressive to be heard. And sometimes, we're called certain names or very unpopular in the media because we speak up, we say something, we do something, and it's not always popular. And it breaks molds, of how women or girls should be.
Yeah, and speaking of that, like when we first started the book, and a lot of it was because in 2016, one of the backlashes or maybe blessings about President Trump's inauguration was that it was greeted with a huge record number of women. Renee and I were part of those numbers, marching in Washington in the Women's March as it became to be known, and all over the world. But really this outcry of it is not okay. And I think, and I don't know if you have the same perspective, Eugenia, but part of that is this awakening, a reawakening or reimagining of women's roles in the struggle and having to speak out. So I wondered if you could speak to that. I mean, I know that you were talking also about what's happening in Latin America.
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, I just saw on the news a couple of days ago in Mexico, there was a huge protest and uprising, and how these women got together to bring attention to the fact that one of the politicians has been accused of sexual abuse and harassment, exploitation, all kinds of issues, and women just standing up saying no more, we don't want this anymore. Which is remarkable, because oftentimes, especially in Latin American countries, I don't want to speak for everyone or even in the Caribbean, but women are, if we think that women are active in this country, in the other countries that I'm speaking about, they are not. It is not a safe place to do that. Not that it's entirely safe in the United States, but so it was really, really, something, spectacular from my point of view. Not to say that it doesn't happen. We've had, mothers come up and complain about, they're missing children. In Argentina and Chile, we've had, all kinds of things, but for them to become violent in terms of their aggression, I think, just speaks to another level of, frustration. I'm not saying that violence is the answer, but I'm just saying that, now we're reaching new possibilities, new heights in terms of our level of tolerance, in terms of women's tolerance for this kind of behavior. Any other thoughts or questions? Because I did want to say something else, which is, I'm working with an organization right now in Guatemala called Mujeres Iniciando en las Américas. And it's one woman who has taken it upon herself to educate youth, children, families, men, women on femicide in Guatemala. And it's one of the leading countries of femicide in the Latin nations and Caribbean. It's actually third, second to El Salvador. And so she's put together this project where she goes into the schools and provides prevention and intervention in terms of, calling, understanding the socialization patterns and the social norms that bring on a lot of machismo and masculinity that that often contribute to very extreme violence towards partners, towards women, towards girls, that contributes also to, sexual harassment, abuse, exploitation, mutilation, torture, and murder. And oftentimes these are categorized under, gang rapes or other scenarios, or under, prostitution, or they were sex workers, or, whatever they're being called. But the bottom line is that there's just a lot of violence out there towards women, and femicide, it's a huge problem, and it happens, across the world.
Mhm.
But this woman has taken it upon herself to begin. She founded this nonprofit pretty much by herself, and it's geared, or actually founded in the principles of the White Ribbon Campaign, which is a Canadian campaign. And so she's trying to institute this in Guatemala, and she's had, there's a lot of, it's very difficult to do so, and it could be at risk for her own life, honestly, or the people that volunteer with her to do this project. And she runs it all through volunteerism. And so I just want to highlight, because, and you might think to yourself, well, what does Guatemala have to do with the United States? Well, it's all about transnationalism. And I think Annalisa was going to talk about this. We're all really connected, and it's all, geographically, geopolitical, it's economic, it's social background. It's not just gender that we're talking about, nor should the solutions be just about gender.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this organization that you've introduced us to is so, it's so important, not just because of the work that it's doing to raise awareness of what's happening in Guatemala, but what's happening in Guatemala is really what's happening around the world. There's millions of women and girls that are unaccounted for.
Yes.
And this White Ribbon Campaign in Canada, what I think is so interesting about that is that White Ribbon Campaign in Canada is an effort to bring in allies of men and boys,
Yes.
to help provide, right, like this answer or this solution of action to violence against women. So two things around that. One, with COVID, we've seen globally the amount of intimate partner violence, and we've talked about that at Say Something, skyrocket. I think that it's somewhere around, 42 million new cases of intimate partner violence that have been reported. So, all of you here today know that those numbers are just the tip of the iceberg when we talk about official reports. But the other thing, is, one of my favorite kind of sayings in the Philippine women's movement is, we got to do this together, right? We have to look at who our allies are. The nation won't be free until its women are free, and women won't be free until its nation is free.
Right.
So, in the Philippines, where the patriarchal, machismo, misogynist President Duterte is trying to trade his nurses, Filipina migrant nurses, for vaccines, right?
Oh.
It's crazy. Certainly we have to take this kind of global, this global approach.
Which reminds me, like, sometimes, like the question that we were asking earlier, like, what does it mean to have a seat at the table? Sometimes these tables we're not built for women. We're not built for women from different backgrounds. And so, like what Eugenia was sharing about the organization from Guatemala, like the woman who started it there, she built her own table. And sometimes we have to build our own tables and work together and support one another's tables to help improve the lives of women, not just here in the United States, but around the world.
Exactly.
And what, just out of curiosity for everyone, is like, what inspired you to continue to learn about transnational feminism, and what does it look like today living in a pandemic?
Wow, that's an amazing question. I don't know that I can answer that. I can barely answer any, about pandemic in general. Like, what is going on? This is like
Still processing.
and so yeah, you've got, transnational feminism, you have violence against women all over the world, and you've got, growing numbers of, femicide, and then you throw in the pandemic. So we're just barely understanding, part A, right? So I think, I think we have to put on some new glasses to be examining now, I think even deeper and further, because the consequences are going to be not just pandemic or post-pandemic, but I think the consequences will be endemic, and that it brings opportunities for us to really be looking and examining. And now that everybody's affected in terms of the pandemic, we're all looking. So this is like a huge wake-up call, I think.
I mean, I think for me, like one of the things that really inspires me to do this work is, so Renee and I have been talking about this for a while, but also, and we talked about last week too, but is this importance of women's stories, right? And what women are we hearing from? And there's so many millions of women and girls who are missing, whose stories that we don't hear. I mean, that's also a loss of the stories that we don't hear. And this might be dating myself, but in 1993, I heard my first kind of testimonies from women who were labor trafficked, domestic workers that were, trapped in these situations. And those stories, like, I mean, I know this sounds a little cliche, but those stories have been the ones that have really stayed with me throughout this work. And the whole transnational piece really is where we were gonna go. I mean, there was no way, like, as the world became smaller and smaller, as borders ceased to matter, there's no way that we could have done anything but become transnational. And we heard that, like, when we talked about, what does Black history look like? We hear that when we talk about, women's migration. And one of my favorite poets, Warsan Shire, talks about, people do not leave their shores to find another home if it's not for survival. So this incredible migration of women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And throw that Me Too movement on top, which is amazing.
It's interesting. I want to go back to the book, because I think the book is foundational to this work. And it doesn't matter when it was written, and but the fact that it was written, and I want, again, thank you all for doing this. But Eugenia, from where you sit, what happens with those stories in that book? Where do they go? Where could they go?
Yes.
Because again, the stories are written, but
Right.
many people still aren't aware of the.
Well, I think I'm so glad you brought that up, Renee, because part of in each chapter, part of the requirements of writing the story and writing the history and the background to the situation and problem in whichever country and region, because it's multinational, was that the authors had to come up with illustrations or examples of ways to become active and to advocate. They had to talk about how to bring about change. It wasn't just about, hey, here's the problem, because we know the problems are there. All you got to do is, turn on the news, and the problems are everywhere, right? Within this country and outside of the country. And I didn't even mention, our indigenous population and how badly women are treated there. There's a chapter about that as well. But the idea being that there has to be okay, what's next? What do we do? What are we doing? It can't be just a discussion of, all the atrocities. It has to be, how do we see ourselves, empowering ourselves to get out and to improve.
Yeah, and I think that looks different, right? In different countries, but also in different generations. Gabby and I have been talking a lot about, like, what does digital activism look like, or what does activism look like in a digital world? Especially, as both you and Gabby mentioned, Renee, like, being in this pandemic, like, what forms could that activism take? And I think that it's even one of the things that's been a strength has been, this idea now of using technology to become closer and to be able to build these bridges to women in other countries, hopefully, and to find out what's happening in other countries.
Right,
It
and we
is
can
the sign
model.
of the, go ahead, Eugenia.
Sorry, no. And that learning from other countries, we can also model, we could replicate, or we could adjust, adapt, whatever solutions the women and their allies, because I don't want to remove men from this, or other gender identities from this equation, because the allies are just as important, if not really key, towards this change. But learning from other people's experiences and how they're battling so that they're actually making changes at the socio-political, economic level, not just change from blah 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 type of change, but it's got to be systemic and structural sort of change. How we can impact legislation and policy and laws. I'll just give you another example from Guatemala. It's like, you have about 2 women dying a day of, femicide. And yet if you add up all those numbers and then you look at, well, how many of the, perpetrators are, held accountable? Very little, like nothing, like 1% or less. So it's not enough to speak up. It's, you really have to make change at a structural sort of level, and it goes at every level. So, and I'm just throwing Guatemala as an example, but I think that example applies to, to many nations around the world.
Yeah, and I'm in the mindset of I want to know of the most progressive movements, because I think that where people are actually walking the walk and talking the talk, like right now. Because again, I'm going to come back to the book because I think it's such a powerful blueprint for us, with those stories. And it's, how do you activate or keep the movement alive? Because if you could tell us in Guatemala, it doesn't matter the number, it's too many per day.
Right.
That are dying because of femicide. And it's heartbreaking. It triggers many emotions for me to be able to hear this reality. And it's like, okay, so what will be the most disruptive acts? We have the White Ribbon Commission in Canada. We have this one woman in Guatemala that's, doing this amazing work. But how do we push the margins? And this is for all of us, because to me, as academics, it's easy to say, you got to work on systemic change, you got to have policies and practices. And from where I sit, and okay, we got the policies and practices. Well, and what's the protection? I guess it's time for visioning. Because again, someone's dying, someone's being tortured right now.
I think that part of it, and Lisa Maza says this in the book. She opens up one of our sections, and she ends, her essay by saying, we have to strengthen the international women's movement by creating deep roots with the basic masses, and then with international women's groups. And uniting with other social movements, linking globally, and engaging in resistance. In order to achieve this vision of being a society that's free from abuse, et cetera. And I think for me, what that speaks to as an organizer is going back to, in the developing world, we always hear, and in the progressive left, going back to who are our basic masses, right? So in the developing world, those are, students, the economically marginalized, urban poor, farmers, and being able to understand where where the majority of people are situated and living in. And in here also, you know, like many of us in this space are social workers, really understanding where our clients, survivors, and communities are coming from, and going back to that basic. I mean, for me, I think that that's where we take action, Renee. Oh, you're muted.
I'm gonna continue on this. Eugenia, this is part of our creative space, you know, where we start to think about, you know, what are the top, and I'm not going to even put number, items that we can sort of start to say, you know, this is the action. This is the action that needs to be taken. These are the priorities. Because I think that, you know, given the digital age, given the way to push out messages, you know, again, we can't do enough to constantly sort of get out not only the strategic priorities, but the actual processes and ways in which to activate change and to be disruptive in the harm that's being done to women all the time. So what do you think some of the call to action, you know, that you would like to tell the world, the listener, the viewer, when we think about empowering women in the 21st century?
Well, it's a multifaceted question and multifaceted response. So I don't know that I can address all of the possibilities of where to begin or where to enter into the equation. It could be at the middle. But I would say that, you know, given my emphasis in education, that we really need to educate ongoing and from very young, in terms of, you know, social norms, in terms of, you know, violence, in terms of, you know, particularly towards girls and women. I think education for me is kind of a key. And I would say start very young. Don't wait until you're in college to find out, oh my gosh, there's a class that talks about, you know, gender violence. Oh, I didn't know this was happening. Like, you gotta wait to get to college, you know? What's happening in K through 12? Why, you know, our kids, even in the United States, they're not being educated as to what's, you know, what's happening out in the world, or how, you know, the power of women and their influence, and all of our women heroes. We never hear about that, at least not in the books that I've seen, you know, growing up. I've grown up, although I'm from Chile, I did, you know, junior high and high school here in this country. And just like there's no attention to the indigenous or the African Americans, same thing with women. Very, very little is spoken about women, or how women have been, you know, disenfranchised, women and girls, or exploited. And so I would say you got to start with education, and we got to build up the girls and the women. Okay. So that's where I would say, but there's many answers to your question, and there's many ways to enter into the action plan. That's just one way. What do the other women have to say about that?
I'm with you in terms of, you know, raising the level of awareness of our girls, and I'll add boys, because as you mentioned earlier, you know, the solidarity that we need to have with men around gender violence is important to raising the awareness and helping them be the educators of boys and men who are the perpetrators,
Right.
and how we can sort of be more humanistic in our connection to each other.
Yes.
I mean, there's a fundamental element of this is around the lack of humanity and the lack of love
Mm-hmm.
of the beautiful role that women play, and how we're violated and disregarded, and the list can go on. But that's what I would add.
Yeah, I agree, Renee, and I think for me, you know, and how we started the show almost a year ago now, is, you know, I am I'm in this space where the number one thing I'm doing is urging women to use their voices, and to not wait, and also for us not to settle, right? So a lot of you know my work is around human trafficking, and I've been taking a really hard stance lately. I do not believe in prostitution. I do not believe in the sex trade. I'm never going to use the term sex worker. I'm never going to say that it's okay. And, you know, I wanted to give a shout out to Lindsay Castillo, who is a creative content creator, because she's also taking this on, and to Affirm, who is a women's organization that was just on the Red Nation podcast, whose director of Hawaii's Commission on Women really spells out, if we're going to fight the sex trade and the commodification of women and girls, let's fight it. All or nothing. And I think that, you know, we're taught as women so much to comply and to settle and to say, let's engage in harm reduction, but we're never taught to save our lives. And, you know, this is why I love the organization that Eugenia has connected us to today, because I think it's time that we have to start saving our lives.
Thank you.
And for me, one, I think, tangible way we can continue to build up women and girls is, I think the primary setting for children is schools, even though it's right now it's like there's a lot of online learning, but as we're moving back towards schools, and really advocating for a policy that incorporates this curriculum, these courses, or like even social workers on campus that are equipped or comfortable to engage in critical conversations like this, because our kids spend 8 hours a day in school, and a lot of the curriculum and the rhetoric can enable some of these very oppressive social norms. So I think starting there and practicing it in the school setting is needed for when they get into the quote unquote real world.
Great. Yes. And you can have an opportunity, whether it's a boy or a girl, for the new generation.
Yes, yes.
Renee, yeah.
She's like, don't say it. I know.
It would be nice to say that we won't have to have this conversation one day, you know, but this, as always, is the beginning. And Eugenia, we want to thank you for the work that you do, the contribution you have made in this arena. And indeed, you know, sharing the stories, helping all those writers that you encourage to write about this work. It has made a difference because it keeps us in touch with the issue, and it says, remember to remember that this is what's happening every second of the day. So for this and so much more, my dear friend, we are grateful to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we are officially signing off, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to another conversation of Say Something next Friday, same time, 4 p.m. PST. Bye now.
Bye.